Hi, I'm Denise.
And I'm Tom.
And welcome to our podcast, Because We've Been in Your Shoes.
We created our podcast for you, our nonprofit colleagues. As nonprofit professionals with over 50 years of experience combined, we've led nonprofit hospitals, university programs, campaigns that have transformed cities, communities, and campuses. We're from Chicago and Detroit, and now we're in the Pacific Northwest. Our work has taken us across the country from the Midwest to Seattle, to Portland, California, and nationally. We've seen it, lived it, and have learned from it.
We've all been through a lot as nonprofit professionals, and we hear you, we see you, and we understand. We know you, too, are used to wearing many hats. It can be exhausting, but we come together with the shared mission to transform the world. Because We've Been in Your Shoes is a podcast for you, us, and our entire nonprofit community, sharing and learning from one another so we can continue to innovate and unleash capacity for good. We'll hear from colleagues and peers, discuss emerging issues in the sector, and provide you with key takeaways and useful tips to support you in all you do. We believe that people and philanthropy equal possibilities. Join us on the Because We've Been in Your Shoes podcast with new topics and special guests. Hi, Tom. How are you?
I am doing well. How about yourself?
Good. I haven't seen you in a while.
It has been a long, long time. I'm excited to see you. I know you've been traveling. We would love to hear about your traveling also because you were just home in the Midwest. And the three of us were all from the Midwest. So it's going to be very exciting to learn more about what you were doing.
Yes. So I'm excited to jump in and introduce our very special guest, a development leader from Chicago, your hometown, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
It's also one of my favorite cities, who I have come to know. Her name is LaKesha Lockett. We met through the Women of Color in Fundraising and Philanthropy. And since I've gotten to know you, LaKesha, I've really been so impressed with your ability to also share and learn and engage the work that you're doing and the partnerships you're building through your work. For over a decade, LaKesha has been leading development and marketing communications programs, projects, teams, and working with boards and volunteer leaders for a variety of nonprofits, including national and local organizations in children's health and wellness, education, youth development, and programs supporting families. Driven by a passion for continued learning, LaKesha received a certificate in nonprofit leadership from the University of Wisconsin Parkside in 2016 and a certificate in fundraising and development from the University of California, Davis in 2021. LaKesha has a Bachelor's of Science degree in Public Relations from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale and has her Master's in Science in Integrated Marketing Communications from Roosevelt University. With a deep commitment to community involvement, LaKesha has spent her time as a youth mentor, serving on a local board, and participating in various programs as an active member of the local alumni chapter of her sorority. Welcome, LaKesha.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk with you, Bo.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. And again, I'm so excited that you're here for so many reasons. Welcome. So talk to us a little bit about your path, the way, you are this nonprofit leader. You've had this experience for years. What was your path to get there? And what are you doing now?
Okay, so do you guys want the long version or the short version?
Long version.
Long version.
um, well, I'll start by saying it's really funny because I never thought that I would end up in the nonprofit space. I recall one time in one of my undergraduate courses, and the professor mentioned working for a nonprofit. I was like, I don't want to do that. I've always had a passion for like volunteering, but I didn't think that the nonprofit space, working in the nonprofit space would be my thing. And, I feel like they didn't even have like degrees in nonprofit management then, like how they do now. So I didn't think that I would end up in the nonprofit space. I thought that I would be this big PR executive and then eventually open up my own Black-owned PR and marketing firm. But of course, that's not exactly how things went. So, after undergrad, I went to graduate school and studied integrated marketing communications. I was doing that in the evening while working a full time job at a storage company, completely unrelated to the field because, you just have to work when you get out of school. So they were going to be doing some layoffs. So I thought this would be a great time to start to do something in my field, possibly getting another internship because I'd already had a couple as an undergrad. So I spoke with one of my classmates and she helped me to get an interview at this well-known, great, impressive Black-owned PR firm. So I interned there for about 9 months, and then, of course, I was like, I want money, and they're not. They're only giving me $10 an hour. First I was a free, unpaid intern. Then they, gave me $10 an hour. So I switched and started working again, completely unrelated, for a for-profit university, thinking that eventually I would move into marketing. And just one thing to note: during undergrad, we had a project where we had to develop a business and develop a marketing plan associated with that. So what I had thought about, and I don't even recall why it came to me, but thought about, a nonprofit organization. I developed this whole marketing plan around it. So that kind of sparked something in my mind. I had been volunteering for a cancer organization for years. So again, I always had an interest in service, but I was like, I didn't know if the field was for me. Anyhow, let me fast forward. Then at that organization, I didn't really get into the marketing department like I wanted to. There were some organizational changes there as well. So I took that opportunity to connect with different people, one being someone where I was able to do some contract work doing marketing and communications, and then one doing some contract work assisting with grant writing. So I was able to kind of get that experience. And I had already done some side projects, marketing related projects, had done a little bit of marketing work for my uncle's small business. So those things kind of helped me to get my foot in the door at my first nonprofit role, which was as a communications coordinator at a local nonprofit. So those experiences and also some volunteer work that I had done, like, I told you I'm involved with my sorority. So I was like the PR committee chair. So I'd done things with that. So I kind of pulled all that together in addition to the volunteer roles that I had with this cancer organization. I was able to land my first role. And that's kind of how I got into the field. Just was like, well, maybe this is something I want to do. And, just thinking about the diversity that a nonprofit job can bring, which, sometimes it can be a lot, but thinking about the, diversity and the work that it's not so monotonous,
Mhm.
that was how I got into it. So sorry, that's a bit long, but
No,
that's my story.
it's great.
No, that's great. And so then one question follow-up that I have through that introduction through your marketing and communications part, and now you're leading development programs and initiatives. Can you share with us? Oftentimes, those two departments in nonprofits are pretty competitive. Communications and marketing don't always share with development. And then usually development person's also leading that. How has that transition been for you? You've worked in large organizations with both of those departments and local and smaller organizations. What has it been like to transition from the marketing side to the fundraising and being leading fundraising efforts? What's that been like for you?
So the organizations that I've worked for the most part, except for my previous job, the communications and development actually worked together. So it wasn't this complete silo and separation, which I think has been helpful in helping me to transition more into like direct fundraising. So the first job that I spoke about, we were a small team. So there was a communications coordinator, a volunteer coordinator, a corporate and foundations relations coordinator, and then our resource development manager.
Oh, wow.
So,
Okay.
and honestly, although the titles were coordinator, in some organizations it would be like manager, just in terms of like the duties
Yeah.
and responsibilities. So with that, we actually worked pretty closely together. And although I was doing other types of external communication, like press releases, I did get a chance to dig into writing an annual appeal and doing the annual report. So there was some overlap there. So it wasn't like completely communications, like, PR market, and then, okay, now it's only fundraising. So I
Okay.
after a while of doing the communications work, I mean, I love writing, I love talking, it's great, but I knew that I wanted something new, a challenge. So I, tried to take on some additional responsibilities, starting with being like the community group liaison, where I was, working with community groups. Some had previously given, and kind of making that connection. So I feel like I pieced together different fundraising related experience along the way.
Yeah, you're fortunate to be in an environment that also enabled the cross collaboration with marketing and development functions. I have been in a lot of organizations that don't do that
Yes.
and have seen, some of that competition between the two because in larger organizations, they oftentimes don't overlap. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. I do have a question. You mentioned something, and I wrote this down. When I think about space, when I think about diversity, I think about initiative, right? You are a Black woman, you're African American, you're a person of color, however,
Yes.
And the question I was, do you think you were invited into the space you were in, or did you have to take the initiative? And the last question related to that, do you think you would have recognized it before the rise of Black Lives Matter, that you were either invited into space, or you took the initiative?
Oh, no, I wouldn't say that I was invited. I definitely took the initiative. I think that a lot of times, I believe that a lot of times, as a Black professional in any field, of course, in nonprofit, that you are overlooked sometimes, or that you really have to take the initiative. I've always felt that I've had to do more in order just to be able to compete for the same roles. Even as I started to think about advancing or leaving one role to go to the next, I thought that no, I have to get more experience. I have to do more, which is like one of the reasons why I did the nonprofit leadership program. One is, of course, I always want to learn. I like to learn, and just continue my knowledge and education in the field, but also as a way to make myself a viable candidate. So I would say, a lot of times I would not say I was invited into spaces. I think that even with some of the workshops and things related, even in some of those like group conversations, I feel like you have to assert yourself, not be assertive or aggressive, but like, oh no, I have a voice too, and I can hold a conversation, I have input. So I'm being a little long winded, but I would say that a lot of times I did not feel invited. It was more of me taking initiative, connecting with people to build my network, and just constantly trying to develop professionally, and learn and get knowledge. I would say in the past few years, I feel like I've seen changes. I've connected with more women of color, specifically like Black women who are in manager and director and VP level roles. So I'm seeing that more, but it's really more
Mm,
recently. And it's still not like even half of people, but I am seeing it a little more frequently. I think that I do believe you mentioned like the Black Lives Matter movement. I do believe that in the past few years, people have been more intentional
mm,
with saying, okay, we need to hire more diverse candidates. I know that I've seen grantors having within their requirements, they want to know, what is your senior leadership like? What's the diversity of your senior leadership? What's the diversity of your
mm.
board? So I feel like even if I believe that even some organizations who don't genuinely want to be more diverse, they've been kind of forced to, based upon like what's happening externally, and more of an external demand for that.
Thank you for sharing that.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty powerful. And I'm going to follow up with one other question in terms, you mentioned volunteer work, and I've always pushed young people or people that want to get in the field, volunteer, volunteer, volunteer. Why? You get to test, you're going to meet people, right? And so what would you say to young women? I'm going to start there first. young Black women or just people that want to get into this field? What would you recommend
Well,
to them,
one thing
knowing
I
what you
wish
know
I would have
now?
known to keep my network and build my network. When I was a younger professional, it's like I knew about networking, but I didn't know the importance of it that I do now. So, like, even start building your network in college and, make sure that you stay connected with,
Great advice. Yeah.
yeah, make sure you stay connected with your classmates and your professors, or even
Mhm.
other university staff who you may have been connected to because of some club. So that's one. Two, definitely get volunteer experience, get internship experience. I feel that, you're not always going to like come out the gate and just land this big job. It can take a while. And I do think that it's definitely more difficult for a Black woman, but that doesn't mean you can't get experience and you can't do things that's still going to build your resume and build your
Mhm.
portfolio. So you can volunteer, of course, out of like the goodness of your heart, but you can also be strategic and intentional with what experience you want to gain, what type of people you want to connect
Mhm.
with. That's what I would say.
And speaking of networks, that's kinda how we connected through a virtual broader network. I mean, you and I met during God, the pandemic years. I call it's like a
Hmm.
decade in itself. You and
Absolutely.
I with me in Portland and you in Chicago, we met through, I think, a great organization, Women of Color in Fundraising and Philanthropy, and would love to know what made you actually join the organization? It's actually still very new. And what is your take on organizations like that in supporting and connecting more diversity in the specifically the fundraising field, which has predominantly been particularly white women in the field? And then do you think organizations like that are helping to build those networks, as you had mentioned, and providing the programs and offerings that really broaden the community of nonprofit leaders?
Yeah, so let me first say it was great connecting with you.
Yes,
It
likewise.
was great connecting with you. And I felt like we were like in similar organizations. And
Yes,
it was, I mean, look where we are now. So, like, you've invited
yes,
me. So, one, I just want to say thank you.
yeah.
And connecting with you has been wonderful. In terms of just the organization, I wanted to see what their programming was about, right? Because, of course, again, I love to do professional development. And I definitely was drawn in to the organization like, oh, this is for women of color. Like, wow, this is great. Because a lot of times in some of the other nonprofit professional organizations, I've been in rooms of 200 people and there's like 10 Black people, right? Or 10 people of color, five Black women, two Asian women, so
Yeah.
it's, I just was like, this is wonderful. It's new, but what could it, what harm could it do, and then I also was intrigued by the fact that they had that philanthropy aspect, so not just fundraisers but philanthropists, because a lot of times people don't even think that Black people or people of color are philanthropists. So I just thought that it would be like a unique opportunity to connect with other women of color, and I think that there's value in connecting with people that may have a similar shared experience. Like there's community in that. There's more like understanding in that. And, sometimes there can be more support. Not that I haven't been supported by, white women who I've connected
Mhm.
with, but I just think that, you can feel sometimes more comfortable, and you and can be a little more candid to talk about
Yeah,
things that you may be experiencing. So those are things that drew me. And I
yeah.
think that organizations like that, I believe your question is how I feel about those type of organizations. Maybe
Yeah,
you
how
could.
are those organizations helping to support the culture overall in the nonprofit field to be more diverse?
I think that, well, one, like they have a job board, right? And I think that
Oh,
like
yeah,
things like
that's
that,
true.
when people are saying, "Oh, we can't find qualified candidates of color," it's like, well,
Yeah, I hear that's terrible. Yeah.
where are you looking, right?
Yeah,
So I think that that is one way,
yeah.
right? Like they're helping, like organizations can come to this group to find those
Mhm.
candidates that they may be looking for, right? Or at least to
Yeah.
expand their pool more intentionally. And I also just think that some of the conversations, again, even just around the fact that Black people and people of color can be philanthropists. They are charitable, because I think that's something I've experienced at some organizations, is that they don't even consider like reaching out to Black communities to get money, right? There's like this assumption, and it's like Black people
It
are very
yeah.
charitable. So, I mean, I just think that these type of organizations and
Yeah.
similar ones really kind of expand those conversations and allow people to connect with each other in a more, I would say, comfortable and supportive environment.
I agree everything you said. I've been a part of that organization too, and it's really helped me. Also, as a white presenting woman, even though my background is not traditional Christian European, I come from a different part of the world,
Yes.
but it's really also helped me also understand the biases that I've operated in the philanthropic space, particularly with donors, the prospect lists, those, and expanding that. And,
Yes.
there's also different cultural communities that people don't even think to tap in to, and expanding what the philanthropist looks like, I
Hmm.
think is a positive that's happening, but more of it has to happen every day. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and let me just add to that. Look, we all bought into it. I mean, we all did. I'm African American. I brought into it. It was an awareness for me to go like, oh, wait a minute, because we came into a system and we were taught within that system on how to raise money, right? And so we brought every one of us, at least from my perspective, we brought into it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that I mean, I do
Mm.
believe, we know that the way that the world is set up, in
Yeah,
terms of wealth distribution, that
yep,
yes, there are going to be, like, Black people don't have the same amount of wealth, right? So, we know that, like, there's that. But in terms of like just being philanthropic and giving back, it may be in a different manner,
yep,
right? It may not be at the,
yep.
and I mean, it is at the same level for some people, but so I just, and I'm, like you said, I'm even still learning things and learning about like these
Mhm.
giving circles and things that I had no idea about. So, it's always a learning experience.
It is. It is. Let me ask you, Lakeisha, you mentioned something about companies, organizations being more intentional. And I was thinking about this just now. What would you recommend to companies on their hiring practices? What would you say to a company? Look, if you want to diversify your organization, here's some things you should start thinking about, start doing. But also, it's not so much about recruitment, right? It's about the retention. I just want to hear from
Hmm.
your perspective. What are your thoughts around those things?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. Even with recruitment, I think that it starts with, and I know you have to start somewhere, but sometimes it's like, well, who's on your board? If you're
Mm,
saying you want to recruit more diverse candidates, but your board is not diverse at all, especially at this day and age when people are just more conscious of the type of organizations that they want to like commit their skills to. I think people look at that. They look to say, that board has 20 people and there's only one Black person. I'm not sure if this is a good fit for me. So I think that that's one thing. Like, it even starts with your leadership. Um, I think that people can, I think promoting, like, once you do have people within the organization who come from diverse populations, I think that making sure that they have the same opportunities and that they get promoted, and not saying like, because some people say, well, you want me to promote people that are not qualified? Of course not. But giving those same opportunities, right? Because I think a lot of times organizations really just don't give the same opportunities for promotion or to work on a special project or, to get some additional experience to people of color, Black women. And then that makes them want to leave, right? And then it's that constant turnover. And again, if someone's coming into an organization, they're like, oh, I'm going to be the only Black person here. Sometimes people don't mind, right? But sometimes, again, I think that now people are really looking at that more. And I would say casting the net differently, like maybe do some non traditional methods, like looking on LinkedIn, looking at people's profiles and to see who you can. And I know everyone doesn't have the time for this, right? Especially with nonprofit organizations, they don't always have
Hmm.
this big HR staff to do this. And looking at organizations like what we just talked about, Women of
Yes,
Color and Fundraising and Philanthropy, I know there's like African American development officers. I just think being more intentional with that, and not saying that you only have to recruit through there, but are you at least tapping into these organizations? And I think even like tapping into historically black colleges and universities, so that like you're getting people out of college
agree.
into
Yeah.
organizations. And I think that those all those things can be beneficial.
I
That's
love
right.
your perspectives. Thank
Yeah.
you for sharing. I mean, you're giving us a lot of great tips and takeaways, so
Oh, yeah,
I'm
I
sure
agree.
people appreciate
Mhm.
hearing those.
Yeah, and let me just add, Dinesh and I have talked about transferable skills is
Yes.
another one, right? I think
Yes.
sometimes what we end up doing, we end up getting the same people because we're like, we're looking for someone that does this so we can bring them in and just do the job. But we have to take the time out, as you said earlier about, and I love the word you've been saying is intentional. If I'm going to hire someone and I want a diverse background, that means I'm going to have to spend the time as a leader,
Yes.
as a supervisor, to help them grow in that area. If I get someone from outside the field, that's how we're going to diversify.
Absolutely.
Also,
I
Yeah.
think I absolutely agree. Like, there's so many transferable skills, like you mentioned, that people overlook sometimes because they're looking for something very, very specific. And then
Mhm.
I think that a lot of people, when they're looking to hire someone for their team, it's always this, well, will you fit into our team culture? Well, will you fit into
Oh,
our
I
team
hate that.
culture?
Oh,
Oh
thank
yes,
I hate that.
And
yes,
it's kind of like,
Culture fit.
well, maybe your team culture has to be shaken up a little bit, like,
yeah,
because like if you truly want diversity of like not just color but ideas and experiences, you shouldn't be looking for, oh, is this going to be the person that I'm going to like hang out with after work and have coffee with? And
right.
I think that some people are looking for that, and it's like, well, let's expand that. Like, what can this person bring to the team that doesn't exactly look just like us?
That's right.
This is such a great conversation, but you'll have to tune in to the next episode for the conclusion. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Because We've Been in Your Shoes.
Join us next time as we share, advocate, and highlight experiences and ideals from nonprofit colleagues, leaders, and champions.
Subscribe to Because We've Been in Your Shoes podcast and be the first to hear our new episodes introducing new topics and guest speakers. Remember, nonprofit friends, you're not alone because we've been in your shoes.